In June of 2007, I also had a sharp surge of hallucinations, apparitions that came out of the blue and had no relation to the external world, and this has continued to some extent ever since. Neurologists speak of simple or elementary visual hallucinations as opposed to complex ones. In the simple ones, there are hallucinations of colors, shapes, and patterns. In the complex ones, there may be figures, animals, faces, landscapes, etc. For the most part, I have simple ones. Almost from the start, sparks, stripes, or blobs of light have appeared in my visual field, as well as complex patterns resembling alligator hide. I sometimes think that a wall is patterned or textured when it is not, and have to touch it to be certain whether the stippling I see is real. I often see a multitude of little tufts, like tussocks of grass, all over my visual field, even with both eyes open. At other times there are checkerboards, usually black and white, but sometimes faintly coloured. The apparent size of these checkerboards depends on where I am projecting them. If I look at a piece of paper 6 inches away, I might see a checkerboard on it the size of a postage stamp. If I look at the ceiling, it might appear to be a foot square. If I look at a white wall across the street, the checkerboard might be the size of a shop window. Some of my checkerboards are rectilinear, others are curvilinear, and some have an almost hyperbolic shape. Sometimes one checkerboard will undergo fission, or multiplication, becoming a dozen smaller checkerboards arrayed in rows and columns. Complex patchworks or mosaics are common too, and seem to be variants or elaborations of the basic checkerboard patterns. These tend to switch from one to another in constant kaleidoscopic change. I see tilings or tessellations composed of polygonal, often hexagonal pieces, some flat and some three-dimensional, like honeycombs or radiolaria. Sometimes there are spirals or concentric rings, or radial patterns like filigreed doilies. Occasionally I see maps of enormous unknown cities, as might be seen at night from a low-flying airplane, with ring roads and radial spokes illuminated, looking like giant spider webs of light. Many of these patterns are microscopically detailed. I see thousands of lights in my nocturnal cities. These images or hallucinations have greater clarity, are more fine-grained than perception itself, as if my inner eye had an acuity of 20/5 rather than 20/20. The most constant patterns, perfectly visible with both eyes open, and especially so if my visual field is otherwise blank, are stick-like or occasionally curved patterns resembling letters or numbers. Occasionally I recognize a 7, or a Y, or a T, or a delta, but for the most part they are unintelligible, like runes. They make me think of a child's letterbox, with letters spilled out at random and at all angles. They are rather faint and often have double lines, giving the impression of being incised like the lettering on a stone. These pseudo-letters and pseudo-numbers often flicker and form, dissolve and reform in fractions of a second, all over my visual field. Sometimes, if I am looking at a horizontal segment of a wall, the runes come in a row, like a frieze. Most of the time, I am able to ignore these, as I ignore the tinnitus I've had for the past few years. But often in the evening, when the sights and sounds of the day lessen, I may become suddenly aware of these faint hallucinations. And often it is a visual emptiness, a ceiling, a white wash basin, the sky, which makes me conscious of the visual patterns and images continually chasing across my visual field. Yet these little hallucinations are interesting in a way. They show me the background activity, the idling of my visual system, generating and transforming patterns, never at rest.